In every age, God raises people up to speak the truth to the world in a way that is currently relevant. Though our opinions should not be held with the same esteem as the biblical canon, we still carry the hope of Christ to the world. Our society has forgotten what it means to follow Christ. The bright lights of truth seekers are barely visible in the dim twilight of a post-Judeo-Christian society. We all see the darkness coming. All we can hope is to share the light that He has entrusted to us. This is Modern Apocrypha. Hey, I'm Jared.
And I'm Greg.
And this is Modern Apocrypha. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. So today we want to talk about, I guess, Darwinian evolution, a bit of a clash of old science and new science. Before I had my medical leave, my medical emergency, Tucker Carlson was on Joe Rogan, which is a platform that does, hit a lot of people. A lot of people see the statement. And the statement that Tucker Carlson had made was that Darwinian evolution was a crackpot idea that had been fully disproven and it was a joke. And it's just something that we just keep saying, even though we know it's not true. And then the flip side of that, Eric Weinstein, Wendy Weinstein, I'm not actually sure if she shares his last name, but the married couple that are evolutionary biologists, they've been a bit red-pilled. They've been moving towards more of the truth, but still dogmatic about this particular line of text of Darwinian evolution being a truth that you can't deny. And even if it shifted a little bit as far as what it means, it's still true. Yada, yada. So these two sides of the coin of Darwinian evolution is a thing that's fully disproved, and Darwinian evolution is so fundamentally true it's not possible to disprove it because it was general in its statement. So those two sides are.
Before we dig into that, let's do one quick thing. I personally would not have a problem if I talked to God and God told me evolution is true, that this actually did happen this way, that I used these forces to create all that I created for life. I actually wouldn't have a problem with that. I don't find it incompatible with Christianity or with the Bible necessarily. I have some problems technically with what the Bible says where it doesn't balance out to me, but if I discovered that I had been misreading or misunderstanding, that actually wouldn't hurt my feelings. So before we get down the rabbit hole, I just want people to understand that to me, all that matters here is what is the truth as near as we can tell. What is the closest thing to true that we can discover? I don't have an agenda or a dog in the fight exactly. I just have a lot of time spent looking into what actually is going on. And to me, what Tucker said is obviously correct, but right? So
I would say that
you said.
Well, I'll put my 2 cents in on the same topic. I am 1000% in the pursuit of truth. However, I am not forgiving of those people that have bludgeoned truth seekers for seeking truth, presenting truth, and then getting browbeat with falsehoods because of a dogma that is obviously false. So on the one side, I'm truth seeking. On the other side, I want people to understand that you are wielding a false weapon against me that I am going to bludgeon you back with so bad that you can't breathe if you try and come at me with this curse word one more time. I'm done. I'm done with your lies. I'm done with your. You're wrong. Now, the two different things that the Bible does say as opposed to what evolution says, and I think a definition of what evolution is important because a shifting definition, a shifting goalpost is the method by which they keep using the silly word. So, evolution as a general English word means things changing, period, over time due to environmental causes, right? Any change of any kind over time due to environment is an evolution. Any change over time due to causes is evolution. It's a very general term. Darwinian evolution posits that from a single celled organism, things got more and more complicated until mammals, birds, different species arose out of a single celled organism and then further got more complicated, better, and formed humans. If we follow what the Bible says, that may or may not be true according to what happened with the creation of the earth and the animals and the oceans. Those things were separate and created in a way. And then, even if they were used in the creation, there was intelligent design, an additional step, something, an additional oomph that separated man's creation from animals' creation from plants' creation. We call it 7 days, but 7 periods, right? Different developmental periods that do harshly put lines in place that show where new complexity was introduced. It came from an intelligent being.
Can I add one thing to your definition of evolution? Inherent in that definition, as I have always understood it, is the notion of um, increasing complexity and increasing information in the DNA from purely environmental factors that have no intelligence operating through them. And if you use that definition of the word evolution, then it is incompatible with scripture. It is incompatible with the Bible. And that's the way I've always understood it, is that evolution requires environmental factors without intelligence behind them that result in increased complexity and increased information in the genome.
So we do have a bit of a dialectic issue here because on the one side, evolution by natural selection, those words combined, evolution by natural selection is what you just described. Evolution is general. The Civic by Honda has evolved over time. That's the English word. That's what it means. It's changed over time. Right. So the dialectic issue is that evolution is, of course, true. It is defined by the meaning of the word. But evolution by natural selection, A, doesn't happen, and B, is not evolution. It is just natural selection only. That is, I pulled it up. One of the things that I have a big problem with
That's
Darwin.
actually not entirely true. I've been reading a book recently that sort of throws a monkey wrench in that thought process. But I want to save that for later, and I want to actually deal with the meat of the first thing you brought up here, which is let's actually look at the concept of Darwinian evolution. I like that framing for it. And let's deal with the one thing that you can't get past conceptually that just makes this whole thing impossible. Any kind of randomness is always detrimental to an ordered system in terms of the orderedness of it. You never ever in nature ever see randomness increasing the order and complexity of an ordered system. It always degenerates it. This is not this is not something that you can change with enough time and natural selection. This is not something that you can ever actually affect. So let me give you an example. There was an experiment. There have been a number of people who did these actually experiments where people exposed fruit flies to low levels of radiation to see what happens, to see if they could get any kind of beneficial anything ever introduced into their genome. And the answer is no. They never were able to do it. No matter how many thousands and millions of generations of these things, they breed every 2 weeks. Okay? So over the course of, and people have done these experiments for close, about 100 years now. Over the course of that time, we have seen just staggering numbers of generations of fruit flies, and there has never been, ever, a documented case of any kind of positive change in the genetics due to any kind of mutation. It has never happened, and it can
That's
never
the key
happen
right there.
because,
That's the key right there. You
well,
called it
going further,
mutation. Mutation is a different word. Yeah,
right. Well, and the Darwinian evolution is based on the notion of random mutations causing positive change in their subject. And that's just impossible. And to put a finer point on this, you can look at things like noise theory, like when you get into the theory of the mathematical theory of noise, and this is used in everything from electrical engineering to music to whatever. This is a scientific
astrophysicist.
field and discipline all by itself. When you get into this field and you start looking at the introduction of noise into a system, what you discover is that even with natural selection added in, adding noise to a system is always going to cause detrimental effects. It can never result in a positive additive result. It's theoretically, and I would almost say physically, but by the laws of the universe, it is impossible for that to happen. And this Darwinian theory of evolution contradicts that. It just straight up does. And so what it has become is an article of faith. Darwinian evolution is not a scientific enterprise. It is not something that is testable by its very definition. It's something that you can't test in a lab, which means that it is an article of faith at some level. You have to believe it. And people like like Brett Weinstein is so much of his worldview, and this applies to Jordan Peterson too. This is another name that you brought up a while ago before we started recording. Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein both have their worldviews rooted in evolutionary theory, Darwinian evolutionary theory, which means they can't process the world without that underlying thought process. And that basically means because their beliefs are in contradiction with the laws of reality, that means that there is always a place where they are going to have, what would you call them? The word is escaping me right now, but paradoxes. You're going to get paradoxes in what you believe. You're going to have two things that can't be true because what you believe contradicts reality at a presuppositional level.
Agreed. Agreed. And I would say it's fairly obvious the dogmatic religion because there's nothing new in the commentary. There's nothing new in the documentation. The first tree of life that is not exactly contiguous, and our fossil records don't provide proof of a lack of intelligent design coming and messing with our genome at some point to create humans after the fact of other animals. There's nothing that proves or disproves that out of the fossil record. If you just took the tree of life, though, that is pre-Plato. That's, 1800 years before Christ was when those documents were created. If you were to take animal husbandry and proper breeding techniques to get an output through appropriate breeding, which is intelligent design, by the way, that was popularized and codified in books by Robert Blakewell, and he died in 1795, 30 years before Darwin was born. It was obvious that animal husbandry and the genetic engineering through the process of pairing animals was a hot spot in the financial and the meme of the day. The when Darwin was a popular scientist, what he was doing was talking about popular science with the twist of no God, and everything from that era with the twist of no God was what was put forth as great new and groundbreaking because of their God. Not that anything they were saying was new. Nothing they were saying were not things that hadn't existed for 1200, 1500, 1800 years. Specifically, the father of modern animal husbandry, I asked you about Unitarianism. He was a Unitarian Christian, which is why he's not included because he was a full-fledged Christian. But Robert Blackwell did write Animal Husbandry in 1725, died in 1795, and Darwin wasn't born until 1805. So Darwin wasn't born until the writers of
Well,
what he
and you
stood
know,
for were dead.
at the same time that Darwin was doing his thing, at the same time Darwin was doing his thing, we had Mendel, I think it was Mendel, doing research on and work on genetic crossing of pea plants to see how the genetics actually worked in terms of expression of genetic characteristics in peas. It was it's fascinating stuff. It was cool stuff, and it was simultaneous with Darwin that he was active. So that's an interesting one too. That is new information. That is stuff that they didn't know before that. He documented thoroughly how one does that. Instead of having some sort of general idea, he really dug in and presented it so you could understand it. So
And
that's interesting. You know, I think that
was that player a religious person or a secular person? Do you know, was his work
I don't
suppressed
actually
because
know.
he was on?
I
I do
don't
feel like
actually
a
know.
large amount of truth has just been suppressed because they wouldn't throw out their faith with the statement, right? If you were unwilling to throw out your faith
He was
with your scientific
he was an
statement, they were
Augustinian friar.
okay. So again, a
Turns
religious
out
person,
turns out he
not
was.
denying his faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and actually, you know, I think that something else that you brought up at the beginning bears repeating here, and this is one of those things where I find myself in a position where, um, actually, I think you said it off air. You gave me the link to this video of guys who were talking about the reality of whether or not Darwinian evolution is possible, and I'll include the link to this video in the show notes. Um, it's by design Meyer, Lennox, and I can't pronounce that last one, talking about its Hoover Institution, a video of them talking about the case for intelligent design. Um, and you were saying how they're kind of like being all apologetic about it. Like they're like, we're sorry, but this is true. We're sorry, but this is true. And you know, I understand that instinct. I felt like that for a lot of years, but at this point in my life, I don't care anymore what these idiots think who have bought into a pack of lies and tried to perpetrate them on the rest of us for the longest time. It's like what you said. I am totally sick of and fed up with this Darwinian evolution bludgeon that is wielded against us as religious people to try to put us down when the reality is it's a stupid idea. It has no theoretical validity even from the very beginning. 150 years of scientific experiments have done nothing but point to the fact that it's stupid, and people are still trying to use it as a weaponry against us. And frankly, I'm just tired of it. It's stupid, and people evict themselves from my Overton window immediately upon saying they believe it.
Well, I think that standing strong, making fun of them for the wild and crazy flat earther kind of belief that they've got, and using the comedy, using not exactly the bludgeon that we were given of you don't get to vote, you may not get to hold a gun because you're obviously crazy if you believe in some fantastical man in the sky. When we never mentioned anything specifically about a shape or anything about it, the Godhead. Just generally
Right.
ignorance as a bludgeon. I don't want to use ignorance back as a bludgeon, but I also don't want to forgive the bludgeon that was wielded. You can now sit quietly and be a part of the adults table, but that doesn't mean you get to take over the adults table because now you agree with us, and so you get to be the head of the table. right? It feels so much like the WEF's statement of building trust, where we are messed up so bad, we'll say anything. Please just put us back at the head of the table. All we care about is being at the head. And I don't feel like that's true of many truth seekers. But even in this, there was Lennox Behe and Mount Meyer. The one of the statements that struck me most is even when we come to the truth, even when we come to the truth, the name of that truth will still get called some sort of Darwinian, post-Darwinian evolution, something with his name still in it, because the Church of Secularism will not let the name die because it's dogmatic. So they've completely given up in the sciences of fighting this falsehood. And so it's incumbent upon the common man to laugh them out of the room every time they try to give leeway to these hateful bigots.
Well, and I think the point that you said about them sitting at the table, sitting at the adult table now, is an appropriate one to emphasize here. There's a guy in a group chat that I frequent who came from the left very recently. He voted for all of the left wing presidents you can think of. And now he's in this conservative group chat acting like he has some kind of special knowledge or special understanding of what's needed for the conservatives to win because he was recently a liberal and he knows what offends liberals. And I've just told him repeatedly, dude, you need to sit down and shut up. The fact that you just came from the left means that you have to relearn everything you know before your opinion is even one that anybody should listen to. You have just proven by saying that nothing you have to say is valuable. The same is true of these Darwinian evolutionists because they accepted this for so long and it was the basis of their worldview for so long. Basically, nothing they have to say is valuable until they go relearn their stuff, learn what's actually true. Then maybe they'd have something useful to say. Until then, they really don't, and nobody should be listening to them.
Nobody should be listening to them, and every time you see them poke their little idea out from under the shell, it should be laughed back into obscurity because it is so obviously false and used by those same people that would bludgeon us into the misrepresenting a young boy as a young girl, etc., etc. Right? It's only about forcing people to say yes to falsehood. It's like the devil just loves to hear people say yes to falsehood. That's his favorite freaking thing.
Absolutely, it is. Well, and like you say, this one of the major things that's interesting about evolution, a point that was made in the book Evolution 2.0 that I just read, was that no concept that is no concept that challenges the idea of natural undirected processes being able to create new information in the form of new genetic material, no idea that goes against that is considered in that particular group of people in academia, which is an indication to me that academia and the mainstream are and have been basically children of Satan for the entirety of the past 150 years since this all got started. Back then, back around the time of, oh, Einstein kind of marked the end of that era of huge scientific advances, one after another. A lot of the people who were responsible for those were Christians. And it was only by an understanding of the world that saw God as being paramount that they managed to get to the places they got to. Since then, we've kind of entered a dark age. And the past 150 years have really been a dark age of science in a lot of ways. Now, we have had advances in other areas in terms of like manufacturing and other things spreading across the world to alleviate poverty, the better use of energy. But other than that, it's been pretty grim and dismal since we started embracing this Darwinist fantasy falsehood.
It really has been. And you mentioned this before that there was a time when the Catholic Church was sort of all powerful, and over the course of about a decade, they lost all say, all power. Um, and I kind of get the impression that that was a bit of a shift, that those people seeking power left the church and joined the university at that time, and progressively, quickly, just started adding paganism into the university system as soon as they got in.
Well, the span of time between those two events was pretty extreme. I mean, that was almost 1,000 years. So I think there's a little more to it than that. But the point that when power is centralized in a particular structure, it attracts the attention of agents of the enemy is a totally valid point, and it's accurate. And it tends to pull the powerful people there, even though what creates power is usually a something that comes from God. It attracts the enemy and he wants it. And so he tries to steal
So
it. That's the repeating cycle of history in a lot of ways, isn't it?
it is. It is. It's something described by the other Weinstein brother, where Harvard is an ideal test case, test bed of sharp minds, sharp elbows, I think is how he puts it, where it's an interesting combination of those people who are the worst of people combined with those people that are the smartest or the best of people, however you want to look at it. You know, the highest level of truth seeking compared with the highest level of power seeking. And somehow in the past, that has balanced to something that has been a force for positive effect in our country. That's questionable whether that's an effective outcome of the system or not. But an obvious it is obvious what happens whenever you get yourself involved in those systems, because as the truth seeker, you find yourself quieted and shut down. And as the power seeker, you're the Claudine Gay that lies to get your position and steals all of your information and has the most politically correct uh, 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 documentation that shows who you are. Yeah, your background, your what would you call it? Your biography. Your biography, as it sits on paper, looks the best, even though you're the worst possible candidate to run into them, right? And so it goes out of control. It gets out of hand. And what lets it get out of
Yeah, that
hand
makes
is when the
sense.
truth seekers don't either walk away or whistle blow and say, "Hey, what's going on here?" I mean, look, I'm one of the smart ones. They can have the power, they can have the money, but they can't lie, right? They need somebody to get crucified every once in a while to say that. And it's at some point we stopped allowing ourselves to be sacrificed for the truth.
Well, not really. I mean, that is actually what we as Christians are called to do: is to take Christ's place and be sacrificed for things that matter. Actually, that's sort of part of what our function is. Hey, we're right at the point for a break here. Shall we take a quick break?
We probably should, yeah. We'll
All
be back
right.
in a minute, guys.
We'll
We'll
be
talk
back
to
in a
you.
minute. Hey, everybody. The Kickstarter is funded, and looks like we're going to be getting another anthology of characters from Brightstar, which is, by the way, one of the big reasons for Modern Apocrypha. If you haven't got a copy of Brightstar, or if you're interested in the anthology, head over to the website, e6universe.com. There will be more info coming up on that. If you're not on my email list, you should be, because I'm sending out info as new stuff comes available or there's new information. I am really looking forward to getting this anthology done. I currently have a tie between John and Rachel and Kevin as being the subject of the final short story for the anthology. If you've read Brightstar and you'd like to weigh in on which character you want to see a short story written about, please drop me an email. I'd love to hear. I need a tiebreaker, so um, let me know what you think. And just thank you, everybody. I just really appreciate your support.
I'd like to take a moment to thank all the people enjoying modern apocrypha. As many of you can see, I'm an avid coffee drinker, and I've been drinking North Arrow coffee for a couple of pounds now. You can find North Arrow coffee at northarrowcoffee.co, all one word, where they list coffee of the month and how green coffee is handled. I've been enjoying some of the number 4 Honduras and some of the number 10 Peru, available at northarrow.co. If you'd like to help support us even more, you can use discount code E6 for 10% off your coffee order today. Thank you.
And we're back.
Welcome back, everyone.
So I wanted to talk about this book, Evolution 2.0. Um, I actually have a major bone to pick with the author in one sense, but overall, the book's right on the money. Um, so the way he framed it is that his brother was started to fall into atheism and was challenging his own view on things. They had both grown up young Earth creationists, and I suppose you would say in this day and age, his brother was deconstructing, but so he and a lot of what his brother had to say was sounded good as objections to what he believed. And so he said that he set out to actually question and get to the bottom of what was going on with evolution and whether it was true or not, and that he was willing to accept it if he found out that it was true. And so far, so good. That's fine. I'm interested in the truth more than anything. But the one thing that he does in this book, I'll just preface it with the bad and then we'll go into the good. The one thing he did in this book that I absolutely hated is he tried to rehabilitate the word evolution. Evolution has always had this context of development without the hand of a creator. That is the context it has always been used in for my whole lifetime. Now, I'm sure there was a time when that wasn't true, but that's what it means in popular culture. And the reality is where he ended the book was basically that there are mechanisms going on in the human biology that are really fascinating, and they're beyond what most people are aware of. And there are 5 of them that he points to that are factors that could lead to massive changes in organisms purely through means that are already there, that are already available in the body. And that's fine and good, but he goes to great lengths to point out that we have no idea how new information is created in the genome, and that in order for a genome to come about, you have to have, for a genetic code is a code, and the requirements for a code, you have to have the meaning, you have to have an encoder, a thing that creates a message in the code, and you have to have a decoder, something that understands the code and decodes the message. Those are all required, and those are all present in the genetic, what would you call it, in the cell, basically. They're all
The
present.
genetic material.
And so that's, sorry, what?
Just in the genetic material. Yeah.
Yeah, but the point here is just that all of that's fine and good, and it's true, but what he tried to do is, it's like what you said, where people have just given up on getting this lie out of the concept. He played right into that. He started calling it Evolution 2.0. It has nothing to do with evolution. The set of things that he found that are present and real are, they're all mechanisms that are available within our current biology. We have no idea where they came from, but you can't you can't get just a part of them without having the whole thing function. It doesn't work. And there is no such thing as random mutations giving you a
Positive. a non-mutation.
giving
It's
you
always a mutation.
right. It's
We have
all
no
well.
proof.
It's always a negative change.
Indeed.
Right. It's always a negative change. We've never observed a positive change ever in
And we
history.
tried. And we've
And
been trying like crazy.
right, and we've tried. Well, and we've tried, and theoretically there shouldn't be based on noise, based
There
on the way randomness works. It shouldn't be possible. Engineering requires an engineer. Now, interestingly enough, in this book, he does bring out some very new, very interesting concepts that I really thought were pretty cool. One of them is epigenetics. A lot of people are somewhat familiar with epigenetics. So, an example of epigenetics would be there was a famine in the Netherlands, and um, people who were pregnant during the famine had kids who were much shorter and had much more tendency toward obesity related disorders, where basically they were tuned for being less needing less food, and then those people's kids had the same thing. So it wasn't just passed on, it wasn't just something that happened to the mother being, happening to the child. It was actually epigenetically passed on to the next generation. That's pretty fascinating. um,
it is.
so that's one of the things that can happen. Anything you wanted to add there?
I
You
have
look
a
like you were.
question. I have a general question
Yeah.
that is obviously related, but generally. So we've got this concept that you believe that due to the mechanics and just the fact of the way that Bitcoin works, the way it works, it is a force that's going to vacuum everything to it, right? It's just because it's what exists, it's going to be the thing that draws other things towards it. Is the word evolution now at that
Yeah.
point where trying to meet people where they are and fix their understanding of something and reuse a word now in a proper way? It's hard to be mad about rehabilitating the word while also understanding that you're going to grab billions of extra people by using a keyword that they recognize, even if you're changing the meaning of it. Right? It's kind of a strange
I would
place.
I would liken this to the Israelites coming back into the land of Egypt and failing to fully eradicate the Nephilim who lived in their immediate surrounds back in Moses' day. It has plagued them to this very day. The origins of Gaza and the East Bank and all of those other things, that comes from places where they didn't kill all of the Nephilim that were in the land at the time. And they still have problems with it. And so I think the only appropriate course of action when it comes to evolution is to eradicate the notion of evolution to the point where it is a laughing stock, and that's the only way we can actually rub out the lies that have become inherent in it. I think without that, we're going to be stuck with the baggage until Christ returns, and we may be anyway.
That's fair. That's fair. I'm of the opinion that the word should die. I think that if it's got a true, English
Um,
language definition, and that's one thing,
yeah,
that's fine. But Darwinian evolution or evolution by natural selection or whatever grouping of words that was this scientific book off the shelf, put the stamp on it, proved false, right? And let it be remembered as a false thing. Therefore, we need a new word for a true thing. So whether that's
yeah,
biblical evolution or, yeah, there's lots of ways I could think of that would suit me that would not suit others. So, but I do believe that
right. And
I would also,
I don't really care.
I
I don't care
do.
what word we
I
use. What
think
I
should
care
die.
about is, well,
I think feminism
I
should
agree
die.
with that. I think the term needs to die, but beyond that, where we go with it is, yeah.
Well,
Do you want me to
truth
finish
seeking
hitting
is your name.
what he
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that was one of the ones he pointed to. Another one was transposition, where a cell can take a piece of the genome and use it in an entirely different place when that part of the genome is damaged. So you'll find that there are rules by which all of this can happen. It isn't just random how they transpose. There's apparently rules for how they can do it. We don't understand it very well, but it can actually take a working piece of code and replace or working piece of DNA and replace a broken piece with that. That's a thing, which results in interesting changes sometimes, and it in humans it has often resulted in sickness and genetic conditions, but it also can result in an organism that would die living. So that's interesting. There are three others. I'm going to struggle with the names of them. One is this notion that a cell can eat another cell, and instead of one consuming the other, they can actually uh, get a symbiotic relationship, and that if either one of them were to die, then the other would die. This has actually happened and been observed in the lab. Um, and there are examples of it. Like any green growing plant, the place it gets its capability to process chlorophyll is with a symbiotic relationship with a blue green algae cell. That where if either one is killed, then the other dies. So it's an interesting thing, and they have seen this happen in the lab apparently. And another example would be lichen. Lichen is a combination of fungus and algae. The fungus protects the algae, and the algae feeds the fungus, and they can't survive without each other. But together they can survive in environments where neither could alone. So that's interesting. Um, there,
And
let's see, I hit three of them.
the human race does have a viral agent in our past, some virus in every single human being, period, that exists in humans as some sort of genetic marker. There is an ancient
Yeah,
virus that it affected mankind.
that's true. Um, and that's one of the remaining two that I hadn't hit yet is that cells can share plans, they can share designs for features with other cells nearby, whether they are the same type of cell or not. And when you look at the way bacteria do this, it's really fascinating because they can offer various parts of their equipment to other bacterias. And so the way we get superbugs, for example, is uh, the the antibiotics that we use against these bacteria basically poison them, and they need some way to get the poison out of their bodies, and so they have to go find a bacteria that has the correct pump to get it out of their body, and then they can do that, and that creates a bacterium that's resistant to the antibiotic, and oftentimes that's what'll kill people. Like you get these superbugs, that's how it works.
But what I've noticed about that in the science is that's not evolution because all of the building blocks are there. They're just activated and deactivated based on need. So it's not new.
Well, and even if they're pulling it from a totally separate cell, um, it's still something that where the information that created it already existed in that other cell's genetic makeup, and there is no origin there. There is no. It's just taking it from somewhere else. Now, it's very fascinating that it can happen, but there's no origin for genetic material explained there. And the fifth one is a thing where two creatures that are technically of the same species but whose genetics are not quite the same can create an offspring that has twice the amount of genetic code, and then that code can have exactly what you were just saying, where parts of it'll be turned on and parts of it'll be turned off to determine what's active uh, on the current individual, what characteristics are there. So that's a fascinating one, and that's, you'll talk about breeding and how breeding affects things, and that's one of the ways that we find that it's in that happens. And apparently modern wheat is genetically a very odd thing because it has like 6 times the amount of genetic code of similar things, which shows that this genetic doubling happened a number of times in its past. And so when you put those all of those different things together, you get a pretty interesting set of tools that the cell is able to use to, fix genetic code, to deal with genetic issues, to do all of those different things. That's all. It's a much larger toolkit than we realized. But in reading this book, the conclusion I sort of came to is that he is exactly that. He's trying to rehabilitate the term evolution. He's trying to give people a graceful way to bow out of the lies that they had claimed and held to dogmatically, to actually look at something truthful. And I think that's a good thing, looking at truthful things. I'm all for that. But I don't think that we can get clear of the lie without acknowledging it for what it is. It was a lie.
It was a lie for the purpose of bludgeoning Christians. It was not a lie for science sake. Right? The
Yeah.
purpose was for bludgeoning Christians. It was not the purpose of that exaltation of a person. Because I don't believe that Darwin was the culprit in creating the work. It was when he was exalted and lifted up in the space, he saw it. And in his words, he said, I'm not talking about God for or against. You can't pin me down as not a believer. You can pin me down as saying, I don't know, or I'm not basing this on God, right? But I'm never going to say I don't believe in God. And just finding someone that says that my scientific work is not based on God was enough for him to be exalted. And he was always, if you look at the kinds of works in his notes, he thought it was really strange that all of these atheists
Yeah.
found him to be so fascinating in the space. Like I said,
Well, and
most of
I
his work was 100 years old. He was rehashing 100-year-old work.
yeah.
It was
Well,
not,
and the
yeah,
other side of it is, it was, and this is where a lot of people will fall down. They point to human causes before examining the spiritual ones, where when we look at this, what we see here is a tool that the enemy was able to use to bludgeon Christians, to bludgeon the view of God out of the way, to try to take a Christian society and turn it secular. And this was the perfect weapon for that. Darwin probably created it sort of unknowingly, and then the enemy picked it up and ran with it. And what do we say? That's like, it's the same old pattern. It's exactly what we expect to see.
so I suppose where I'm curious what you would say to someone if you want to meet them where they are at, but you don't want to rehabilitate the word, what is the appropriate tone and statement to those people that you love as a brother, even if they're in a bad space and they're not, and you want to bring them out of the darkness. So you can't forgive the idiocy, right? I don't want to bludgeon those people that I respect for seeking truth while in no way, shape, or form am I putting up with this particular lie because I've been bludgeoned by it. And you can't act like everyone anywhere that has mentioned prayer over meditation or anything in a Christian corpus verbiage has been completely treated like they were insane, like actually not functioning correctly. And so after you have been
Yeah.
you have participated in the cult of damaging truth-seeking humans, how do I get to you that you were a part of a cult that damaged truth-seeking humans as professing yourself a truth-seeking human, right? I don't want you to cry, but I don't know how you could come to a realization without tears.
Well, and I guess what you're asking is, if I were to talk to Jordan Peterson right here, right now, today, what would I say to him in terms of evolution? Because
Right.
that's sort of epitomizes the question. I think what I would say is something along these lines, that that where he started from, he needs to look back to where he started from and how the previous version of him would have treated the current version of him. Because that person who he used to be would put his current self outside of the Overton window. And it's because the previous version of him was mired in these ideas that the institutions of society were more trustworthy than they actually are. He has come to realize that those things are not true, that the institutions of society have been infiltrated by lies. Now, the thing that he doesn't hasn't yet understood, that he hasn't yet internalized, is the depth of those lies and the degree to which they infiltrated things. If he were to personally go back and to look at the conceptual framework behind Darwinian evolution and really think about it again, he would come to the conclusion that it's false. I know that because I did that in exactly the same way that he would have to do. He, if he is truly truth seeking, which I believe he is, I've seen it over the past 10 years where he has grown as a person tremendously, then he would come to the conclusion that, these things aren't what I thought they were. And I'm going to have to go back and re-examine my whole view of the world. And that's okay to do. And I don't, but I can't just say, well, you know what? It's, you know, oh well, we'll still take evolution as being okay somehow. No, you can't do that. This was false, and we just have to examine it and deal with it. In reality, that's the only loving, honest thing to do, really. And maybe there was good reason for him to feel the way he did. Maybe being essentially raised up in an academic circle was gave him some excuse for believing those falsehoods. Okay, I can have forgiveness for that. I can have, I can leave room for that and not have,
Yeah, all I can say is
disgust
I'm
for him
pretty good
because
at
of it.
picking
But
out. Yeah, all I can say is I'm pretty good at picking out why on that, and it is a love of the father, a love of the previous professor, a love of the actual father, a love of the respected elder is what the source of the holding on. That is right. It's a source of love. Right. It comes from a source of love. It's just misplaced.
well, and I don't have any hatred for that exactly, but I do require that people who I'm going to associate with hold themselves to a standard where they are truth seeking. And I'm going to keep holding them up to that, and if they won't go there, then they're going to move themselves away from me because they're going to be uncomfortable with me pressing them to do that. And I don't have to agree with everybody, but I do have to have people take seriously the truth. And when I see people not doing that, it says to me that they're not someone who's going to be interested in knowing me long term, because the truth that I espouse is going to push them away. That's my experience anyway.
I suppose that I'm hopeful in this moment because of the sheer number of what people are calling red pillars, but truth seekers, right? People that are looking to find the answers for themselves, not just take an answer. There's a lot more of that, it feels like. Maybe it's just that there's more of it being advertised, right? Not as much of it is being covered up. But it feels like those people that are, you know, able to be reached, there are less walls up between them and I, right? And I'm more called to be evangelical than
Well,
I ever been. So I'm looking for places to talk to people wherever they're at and try to bring them out of their hole. So yeah, the option of leaving them
and
behind
one
isn't
of
there for
the
me.
one of the things about that, that cycle that they talk about in the memes where you've got good men
Oh yeah,
bring, yeah, the good men, weak men,
strong men bring
uh,
good times bring weak men
yeah.
bring bad times, bad times bring strong men. So it continues.
Right, that one. One of the parts of that cycle that isn't usually named exactly is that as the bad times start to come around, you get this rash of truth seekers that go looking for the thing they know is missing. And that's where we're at right now. So it's part of the cycle that we're in where the truth seekers are appearing right now and they're looking for truth. And that's great. I hope, I hope I hope people find it. That's what I've been about my whole life is seeking the truth.
Amen to that. Let's hope they find it, and let's hope they continue to seek.
Yeah. Amen to that too. Mm. Well,
Hmm.
this is probably a pretty good place to call this. Do you have any other thoughts you want to go into before we wrap it up?
No, I would just reiterate that the topic is not in the space that many of the previous experts thought it was at, right? Whenever they are still in the place that non-Darwinians are the crazies, that they need to understand that they need to take a step back and realize that the world sees them as absolutely insane, and they need an apology before they start. Otherwise, they're not going to get anywhere.
That's absolutely true. Well, I think with that, I don't have anything more to say to this. Thanks, everybody. We will catch you next time.
Thanks a bunch, everyone. I'll catch you next time.